Good evening, everyone. I'm Shantel Wetherall, and I am so happy that despite COVID playing its usual games with us, you've still been able to join us tonight for this live stream of our Broadly Speaking talk on meaning, manifestation, and mysticism. Before we go any further, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that tonight's conversation is live streaming to you here from the Wheeler Centre on unceded sovereign land. The event is coming from the lands of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge their elders, past and present, and also send my love and acknowledgement to all mob, wherever you're watching from. I'd like to say happy NAIDOC week, and that I hope that wherever you are, even if you are stuck in COVID lockdown, you're well and being able to celebrate the wonderful contribution of First Nations people to this beautiful cultural life of Australia. Now, I also have some acknowledgements and thank yous. Tonight's event is presented in partnership by the Wheeler Centre, the Capital, and RMIT Culture. And the Broadly Speaking series is supported by Christina Campbell Pretty AM and family, and also by the copyright agency Cultural Fund. So, meaning, manifestation, and mysticism. We know that for eons, human beings have lent on various practices to help us find meaning in the world. Now, there's been a real resurgence and reclaiming of those practices recently, but be that astrology, tarot, manifestation, it really seems to be something that's been very popular among women, non-binary folk, and queer communities, and as well communities of colour. These practices can help provide spiritual and practical direction for our lives and pathways to help us find our own version of success. I'm really lucky to have a wonderful panel of guests with us tonight, who I am delighted to introduce. Firstly, we have journalist and skeptical believer, Amal Awad. Hi, Amal. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we also have creative producer, tarot oracle, and all-around superstar, Erica McCalman. Hi, Erica.
Hello.
We have podcaster, entrepreneur, and self-described spooky binch, Lillian Ahenkan, also known and loved as Flex Mami. Hi, Lil. And we are also delighted to be joined by practicing mystic, poet and musician, Lay the Mystic. Hi, Lay.
Hi.
So, we are going to talk tonight and try to unpack the joy and purpose of mystical pursuits and consider the intersections of spirituality, self-awareness, and maybe explore some of the roots of this becoming so mainstream right now. Now, I know that I can't log into Instagram without seeing something about my horoscope or manifesting, and it's become pretty mainstream, and you're hearing a lot of terminology being just used and thrown around. But when we really come back down to it, it's something that I consider a personal daily practice for me. So I wanted to ask you on the panel, what does mysticism mean in your life as a practice, and what does it add to your life? Perhaps I could start with you, Lay. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So, mysticism is a practice, and the way that it functions in my life is an active engagement with anything that is mysterious. So, it's a process of taking myself to the edge of what's knowable and being comfortable with being vulnerable and engaging with things that I don't understand, that I don't completely have worked out, in order to dispel mystery. So aligning closely with mystery to practically engage with it and investigate it from that point.
I love that. I love that your performing name is Lay the Mystic, but you're also coming at this from the point of view of curiosity and not claiming mastery. That's beautiful. Thank you, Lay. Who'd like to share with us their practice of mysticism and what it adds to their life? Lil?
Absolutely. So I myself am a big fan of tarot, manifestation, and astrology. And I guess I've been drawn to mysticism as probably a reactive response to how logic has me time and time again. So I often find, similar to what Leigh said, something about the unknowable, something about investigating and interrogating the things that you could never know to its full extent, and surrendering to that process, I found to be far more lucrative for me than trying to logic and rationalize my way through life, trying to make sense of things I could never possibly understand. It's like a healthy delusion. And it's a very in practice for me. I don't like to convince anyone of mysticism. I don't like to use it as a tool for connection. I don't hear that somebody else is into astrology and deem them my person, deem them like-minded. I'm really not interested. It very much is a self-serving, centering practice.
I love that. That's so empowering. Erica, can I pass to you in the meantime?
Sure. So for me, I think my practices, which cover sort of Western occult and astrology and tarot and just constant learning, and also being a First Nations person living on this land as well, it's about being the deepest, most human, most authentic representation of myself. Humans are miraculous in how creative we are. We actually don't realize our own power to manifest and create our own realities collectively. We kind of give it away a little bit. So when I'm looking at the cards, or I'm looking at the stars, or I'm talking to ancestors, or making connections between different creative and cultural practices of other people, I just see sort of the miracle of humanity and our creative power. I think creativity is what sets us apart from every other creature on this earth.
I love that. And I can't pass without mentioning this wonderful mystical accoutrements you have in the background there. Can you talk to us about those?
Well, I'd love to introduce to you Belinda. She is the crocodile that one of my clients named Belinda, because I told him that I didn't know her name yet, so that stuck. Then back here, I'll probably just grab it. So this is a local artist in Darwin called Frank Gautier, and he just made a Ouija board that also has mob language on it, and I saw it and I laughed like a drain. So I absolutely bought it, and I've never used it for anything mystical. It just sits there to remind me that life's also inherently funny as well too. And I've got my cards here. I always have a deck near my desk that I play with every so often, and of course read for other people as well too. So I keep those things around me, and they're part of my everyday life.
Are they almost talismans in your workspace?
Yeah, I think they kind of add, probably going back to that theme of authenticity and sort of deep understanding and a reminder of who you are. I like to look at them, and they remind me of who I am, separate from my job or my other responsibilities or my other achievements as well too. They're kind of a way to connect to myself, and just to also all of us, to remind us that you were meant for more than to wake up, work, pay bills and die. You've got another mission on this earth, and part of living is finding out what that mission is, and it's a never-ending adventure and a journey as well too. So it's a way to lift my spirits.
Woo. Hard agree on all of the above, but one thing that's coming through really loud and clear for me, hearing you each speak about mysticism and your relationship to it, is that it's a really empowering thing for you. Can you talk to me about mysticism as self-care? Do you think mysticism is a form of self-care for you?
I can probably jump in on that one because I have clients as well, because I also read tarot cards for others professionally. And I think that absolutely, I've got friends who check out the cards before they go on a date, or have a daily card just as a way to understand the themes or ideas or energies that are coming into their day. But absolutely, something like a tarot reading is a practice of self-care. One of my teachers told me basically half of your tarot reading is just listening to someone else and letting them talk about their life and helping them build a narrative and have tools to navigate it in a safe, private space. We existed before counsellors and psychologists. You used to toddle off to the village witch and have a cup of tea and talk about your troubles or talk about the things that are preoccupying you and come up with ways to navigate those issues, or those joyful things as well too, which is probably why I settled on the slogan of empowering tarot for everybody. Everybody has access to it, whether or not they're a believer or a skeptic. It's there for you as well.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And Lil, I saw you had something to add on that, and I think it's so much part of your brand, is that when I want something to make me feel empowered, I'm like, Lil's got to have a little something for me for that.
I was actually just coughing, but I often balk at the phrase self-care just because of how juvenile the internet has made it seem, like a little band-aid solution for a greater issue, or a band-aid for the symptom and not the problem. But upon reflection, I think that often when I'm operating out of fear or stress, insecurity or anxiety, I do seek out my cards. I do seek out otherworldly insight to kind of justify or rationalize what I'm going through in a way that only I understand. I feel as though often when I am looking outside of myself for answers, they only help to sort of validate that really superficial surface part of me who needs to feel good in that moment. But something about knowing you have the agency to dig a little bit deeper, to speak a language that only you know with yourself, to figure out what you need in this moment. I guess it is self-care of some sort, like a self-soothing practice. Definitely.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the word agency, because I think going inward is so empowering, because as you say, you're not giving your power away, you're not looking to somebody else to tell you, and it's a personal practice. I love that. And Lay, what would you say as far as the self-care, as much as that phrase has been rinsed out, element of all of this for you?
I think that self-care is a conditioning practice that I've become accustomed to. Just the understanding of, so I have a practice in prophecy mainly. So I work with tarot cards, but I ask people not to speak, because the more I know about them, the less of things I can see. So I just ask them to sit down, not talk, and I talk for a long time. And completely and utterly admit to not knowing what any of it's about, just translating. And in order to be able to do that, my self-care needs to happen prior to engaging with mysticism as a practice. So coming to a deep understanding of what's influencing me, what my wants are, what I'm thinking about, what's affecting and impacting me, before I allow my feelings to be projected onto somebody. And then the practice of mysticism kind of turns into this like smooth flow from that point. So as soon as self-care practices fall off for me, I'm a mess. I'm a mess within every different area of mysticism. So yeah.
I love that. I love that it demands a discipline of self-care from you, so that you arrive fully resourced to be able to give, rather than center yourself in that exchange with somebody you're working with. That's a really interesting angle on self-care. I think a lot of the time it's positioned as a crisis response. And I really love a lot of somatic practice, which is about pre-resourcing and topping the engine up so that you don't actually get to the point where you're running on fumes. And I love the generosity aspect of what you've just said, which is that you pre-resource so that you can be generous, so that you can be sharing from your overflow when your cup is full. Wonderful. I am really keen to make sure, Amal.
Can I actually just go back to the very first question?
Absolutely.
I thought that the answers were so spot on, and I think it relates to the second question about self-care. Mysticism is really inquiry. It's really inquiry into the mystery of things unseen, so that we can better know ourselves and who we are. And it's deeply personal. I don't know anybody who is deeply and truly and genuinely mystical who showcases that. It's such a private feeling, and the transformative aspect of that is something as well that is shown in who you become rather than what you show people on Instagram. There's a lot of performative spirituality, and I don't think genuine mysticism is that. And I don't consider I don't know if I am a mystic. I think that I am someone who is definitely curious and a seeker. And I absolutely love tarot cards and anything that I consider a tool that allows me to deep dive into myself, because your inner journey, it is related to the external world, but I think there is a lot of focus on external products and tools and props, and we are completely losing sight when we do that of what it's meant to actually do. And so whenever people talk to me about these things, I'm always curious if they are really seeing change in their lives, and how private they are and how quiet they are about that change. So that would be my thought on mysticism and self-care. It's self-care because if you have that depth of understanding that the point isn't to have all the answers, but to seek growth and transformation, then you will absolutely be enriched by that. It's going to make you better in all aspects of your life, and you don't become somebody who is drenched in blame of other things and anger that the world isn't the way you want it to be and people aren't behaving how you need them to be. It takes courage to be a true seeker in life, because you have to be comfortable with despair and joy, and also learn how to find that even keel, and understand that is much better for you than highs that feel great for 5 minutes but are over once you've finished the workshop. So I would say that.
Holy mackerel. Sorry,
I have a lot of time to think about my answer.
I'm saying holy mackerel because there were multiple moments that you floored me with the points that you just made. I would like to circle back on the idea of being a seeker, being a practice of accountability. How's about that when people are continually disparaging these practices as, frivolous activities? I love, Amal, the way you framed that as actually having the courage to continue to seek the truth, especially to seek inward. The truth being a practice with deep accountability, taking accountability for your journey through life and the outcomes that come from it. Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much. You've all mentioned, I think, or at least 3 of you have mentioned tarot. That's probably something that many people are familiar with. And I just wondered if any of you have a cultural connection or a family connection with any sort of mystical practices. I know myself, I'm a Belize Creole woman. That means that my family have mixed ancestry with European ancestors, but primarily my mystical cultural connection comes from my West African family. And it's incredible how that carries over despite this clipped English accent. It echoes in my life still today, and I find myself doing things, and then I will have conversations with my elders, and they will say, what you're doing is ... and I trace the lineage all the way back to something ancestral, and it's deeply comforting for me, and it makes me feel very rooted in that ancestry whichever beautiful shore I'm allowed to wash up on. Do any of you have ancestral practices that you can trace your connections back to? Or maybe you have ancestral mystical practices that you're not familiar with? I'm super interested in that. I saw you nodding vigorously, Amal.
Yeah, I'm Arab, so we come from a long line of priestesses and magicians and desert, nomads who love the mystery. And obviously Sufism is a huge component of Islam for a lot of people. And for me, it was growing up knowing that we could read our coffee cups to divine information about our days or weeks ahead. And of course, I've revised my understanding of soothsaying in older age. I've realized that it's much more useful to use these things to almost get advice, to look inward. And it's a mirror. It's not really someone being definitive and fateful and saying this is going to happen tomorrow. But, one of the reasons I was so moved by my own research was I realized how much history there was behind me, and my ancestry trailed behind me as I wrote, because it was almost like me honoring where I've come from and not feeling that shame that so often in the West we're expected to feel, because we want to believe or have a deep belief in something other than ourselves, other than, the 3D reality, this idea that there is mysterious forces that are at work in our lives and that we can commune with them and understand ourselves better and improve our lives, I think is quite profound, but it's not new. This is something we've always been doing, and culturally it is flavored accordingly, and I think that that's just a really beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Culturally flavored accordingly. What a wonderful phrase. Erica, talk to me about that wonderful Ouija board is such a beautiful example of two cultures coming together. Talk to me about your mystical elements of your cultural ancestry, how they may or may not be present in your practices today.
It's a really good point that you've made that I just hadn't thought about before. Yes, that Ouija board is very demonstrative of the two universes that I come from. In terms of my cultural upbringing, I grew up in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. Everybody probably knows that great documentary about my family, which is Kath and Kim. That's the background that I come from. My mother has exactly the same accent. I've got the daggy stepfather. We've even had relatives who lived near where they shot. So in terms of mysticism and having access to my Aboriginal ancestry, we were very cut off. We're a forcibly assimilated family. So part of finding that culture, finding that country, not hearing those ancestors, that's still a process that myself and my family are undertaking, and that will take generations to put together the pieces and figure out what the new version of being a Baladang Noongar person is as a result of colonisation. But my grandmother was also a huge influence on me. She was a woman who was Anglican, but she believed that Jesus was a great guy with some fantastic ideas, and it didn't matter whether or not he was divine. She also used to give me the scientific explanations for his miracles, and then she'd go in and teach RI classes and say exactly the same thing in schools. I have no idea how she got away with that one, and she was eventually kind of pushed out of her Anglican church because she stood up in front of the congregation and defended Buffy the Vampire Slayer when that show was criticised, because she used to watch it with me. But but we talk about closing. Yeah, love your Nana. She's an ancestor now. But I loved that our conversations meant that I picked up a book on astrology when I was 9 and I was hooked. I found books on witchcraft during the previous occult revival, which happened in the 90s, and realised that was what I'd been practicing all along. I found places like the Theosophical Bookshop in Melbourne, which has now moved to Flinders Lane, and found books and ideas that really resonated with me, and I kept on pulling that thread as much as you could with the limited internet that we had. So it's still a process of discovery, but I think from my background and from my practice, and for the people who've influenced me, the mob who've embraced me, and from my family and from the other wacky people I've met along the way. We talk about closing the gap. I live my life in the gap. I can tell you all about the gap. I can tell you all about who's missing what point and who's missing which bits of information, because I feel like I'm sitting at the intersection of a great conversation that needs to happen. But also it's a big continuum. Colonization started in Europe. It started before the witch burnings. The first people oppressed and colonized were the Europeans, and then hurt people went on and hurt people. So that's how I see those practices coming together. It's tracing one lineage and figuring out what got smashed and broken and occluded, and then going down another lineage and seeing where the damage was wrought as well too, and figuring out how to maybe come together or figure out how to heal. There's definitely a lot of things that have been missing there as well too. So yeah, that's my mishmash of a mystical existence.
That is... Gosh, there was so much in that, Erica. Thank you so much. I think it's really fascinating to me whenever you talk about mysticism, that there is almost a way that it's exoticized. So it's made out. I speak sometimes to some of my Anglo friends who say, oh, I wish I had a interesting culture. And I'm like, have you been to Ireland where your answer's pretty deep? Mysticism and just because, I think that's the thing. Capitalism and colonialism, the machinery, robbed everybody of their connection to culture. And that is why our rediscovery of these practices is so threatening to the machinery.
Bingo.
So when I'm doing my tarot, I'm like, put my little black beret on. I'm fighting the power at the same time. Love it. And Lil, have you practice, and I love that you also offer people a way in. I think that so much of your writing and so many of the wonderful things that you share in your wonderful business, Flex Factory, like your card sets, are gentle invitations into a world of mysticism for people who potentially may have been separated from those cultural introductions. Talk to me about giving people a soft landing and an easy way in.
I mean, perhaps they might be, but it's never their intention. I see the way people are so rough when it comes to spirituality and mysticism, and I do not want to hold anybody's hand through that process. I feel as though it requires a general interest. And I don't want to be the person who sells you the dream and says, okay, well, maybe I'll start manifesting because something about the way you've projected your life suits me and I want to do what you've done. No, you're the wrong person. You're not the one I want to be speaking to. So I do recognize how my approach to living fully and being intuitive overlaps with spirituality, but it's not my intent to be the silver spoon to a bunch of people who want to feel good. Also, I wanted to make a point about what we were talking about just prior about our own cult spirituality. And I have vivid memories of my mum being so anti-West African spirituality, obviously colonization, blah, blah, blah. So staunch Christians or staunch Muslims. Anybody who practiced African spirituality was regarded as like a witch, a voodoo practitioner, like synonymous with the devil, like synonymous with the bad stuff. And I would always find it really interesting how my mom and a lot of my relatives would not want to make us aware of the fact that African spirituality existed. So they would kind of diminish it or demean it and to be like, it's not serious, it's very silly, it's child's play. But in the same breath, be so fearful of it, be so aware when they feel as though they've been hexed or somebody's done blood magic on them. So I'm like, how do you reconcile these two very incompatible belief systems without making us hyper aware that one exists and you want us to have nothing to do with it? Fascinating. Anyway, it's very hard to speak to West African parents about, the intersections of colonization and Christianity and going back to their roots. I don't want to have that conversation, but very interesting. Also to the point though, I think the reason why I struggle a lot to broach conversations, like really genuine, honest conversations about intuitive living and spirituality and mysticism, is because of the way I know my peers have been introduced to them as well. Like, manifestation is always a get rich quick scheme to get that partner, get that job, get that holiday, live a 4-day work week. It's so superficial at its core. And I feel as though there's a layer of critical thinking that is rarely ever applied. Same with tarot. I know if any of you are on TikTok, or if anybody watching is on TikTok, there is this niche called tarot TikTok, where these readers who are often, look, let me not talk about their expertise, but they'll come on and they'll make these really blanket readings about how goodness is coming your way. And they'll pick up cards, like they'll pick up the Tower card and be like, you're going to have a great weekend with your besties. And I'm like, why are you lying to these people? And everybody's lapping it up. And they'll things like, just click the follow button to receive this message. I'm just like, we're not the same. We're just not the same. And so generally, and part of even my hesitation with coming on this panel initially was that I didn't want to be somebody's conduit to spirituality. I didn't want to be complicit in almost selling a lifestyle, selling a belief system, selling a dogma, selling a doctrine, because I just know that people aren't, they're just not delicate when they're holding centuries and centuries and centuries of spiritual practices in their hands. They're not serious. And I want us to be serious. I want things to be sacred. I want them to be regarded with the respect they deserve. But I also don't want to be the person who teaches people how to do that.
Gosh, some really incredible points about perhaps the downside of accessibility. Because I'm always kind of caught on the fence with that one, because as a person who, through colonization and various other ills of, I call it WASP ink, because when you have to say, white supremacist, patriarchal, it's a lot. It becomes a bit of a mouthful. So I just call it WASP ink. So when WASP ink has separated you from your culture, then I have a huge sympathy for people who potentially are flailing, searching for a way in. And I want things to be accessible for people so that they can find a way in. But then I absolutely will take your point about, is it sacred if you're just giving it away without somebody doing the internal work? And I guess that brings me on to another question I wanted to ask. I'm always curious myself about, some of the practices I've introduced into my life that I feel that I get great benefit from don't originate in my culture. And I wonder sometimes whether there is a risk that I myself am commoditizing things and, taking away what is precious and sacred about them through my lack of knowledge. How do you think you tread that line between being a learner and an enthusiast and a searcher without disrespecting other people's cultures?
Does anyone want to take that?
I could say a thing.
Yeah, I also have.
You go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I have a huge section in my book about appropriation, and interestingly, it's the one section that keeps getting published, as an excerpt. Because I think people really don't understand the extent to which we have a problem when it comes to appropriation. However, there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation. And for me, what I always look for is the source of the information, who's presenting it to me, how did they go about presenting that information to me. I think I've learned a lot. I was probably very naive when I first started investigating, I guess, what you call the so-called New Age practices that have come out. And I realized that there's a lot of, for example, appropriation of like Hindu gods and goddesses. And I do feel that that's starting to come up as an issue for people. And I don't think it was a huge thing before. I think a lot of oracle card decks, and they still do actually have a lot of Hindu, the Hindu gods and goddesses and deities. And I think that I don't think we should be shutting off our culture to other people. I don't think that's the point. It's that it can get downright dangerous and disrespectful when people are using it to make money and that's all they're doing. And I mean, I give examples where it literally ends in death. And so we have to be really careful about who is giving us this information? Where did they learn this knowledge? And are they equipped to really pass it on respectfully? Or are they just trying to make money in a get rich quick kind of way? Because that is part of it. And it's not always the case. But I don't think the solution is to never be curious and connect to other ways of being. I think that there is something very universal about these experiences. But it comes down to the energy of that. Who's involved and why is my personal approach.
Beautiful, thank you.
Own this information that they've gathered. I've seen the moment someone picks up, you know, a little Rider-Waite tarot deck, and suddenly they're a tarot reader and it's their practice, and they will do tarot on you, and you can receive that benefit through them, the source. I think that's when it becomes a slippery slope. I think in private, it's far easier to reconcile your approach to dipping your toes into other bits of spirituality, because generally it's coupled with research of some sort. I mean, for instance, I remember when I referenced a chakra briefly, I knew about the 7 African powers before I knew about the 7 chakras. So I was like, wait, are we not talking about the same thing? I'm confused. And even then, I don't know what the information is, but I feel as though this battle to own this bit of spirituality and to separate those from others, I mean, none of us really are so entitled to it unless it's actually coming from your culture. I feel as though the issue with New Age spirituality is the fact that a lot of it is just reappropriated stuff that's meant to be really accessible and really like sweet and like feel good, and it's a direct response to the rigidity of traditional doctrines, right? And so I get it. And it kind of feels counterintuitive to, no, we're here for like good vibes and ease, and then be like, but wait, there's structure and you need to figure out where you got that from. You need to critically think. People are confused, and like we were mentioning earlier, you'd hate to be the gatekeeper of anything, to say that because you do not have a tie, because you don't seem as genuine about your approach, therefore you mustn't be allowed to participate. But also what we've come from, or what's happened, the implication of that is now it's hard to create any boundaries between who can do what, because everybody feels entitled to everything times. And there are 1,001 ways to justify why somebody feels entitled to something that is not theirs at all. And there's heaps of debates about what practices should be closed and what practices should be opened. And I was on TikTok the other day, and there was this woman, I think she was Hindu, but she was saying that it should be a closed practice. And somebody's saying, well, currently you're sitting on stolen land. You have been assimilated up until this point on your life, talking about what practices should be closed or not. You need to understand that your understanding of your own culture came through a colonized lens. You're learning about it when everybody else is learning about it. And I was like, this is too much. We cannot be fighting back and forth.
The layers.
With 60-second TikToks. It's a lot, but I don't think there's an answer to it, but I feel as though the slippery slope should be, as soon as you try and commodify it, as soon as it becomes a tool to make money, you need to be careful.
I think that's a really good rule of thumb. I also love what was hinted at by both of you there around humility. I think if you approach with humility, you're probably going to stay on the right side of the line, right? Did you have something to add as well, Leigh?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's the responsibility of anybody who's making the investigation to understand what they're investigating. And when there are bits and pieces being from a larger ideology and from a larger system of belief and a system of understanding the world, because as soon as you take it out of that mindset, out of that lifestyle, out of its context, it becomes something completely different, and it slowly corrodes the integrity of what was there. So personal rule of thumb would be to go deep into your own senses and approach any learned thing or any kind of acquired knowledge with respect, just having a look at what it's connected to and having respect for the entirety of its existence, for its the entirety of its integrity, and understanding the body of lifestyle and practice that it might belong to.
I think that's really...
And also agree with both of y'all.
Yeah, I know. This is like a chorus of furious agreement. I love it. Yeah, I think that's really sound advice, going really deep internally. I think you're also probably on to a hiding to nothing if you have that shallow understanding and immediately want to share it with the world. You know, it should be something for your own improvement, for your own growth. And again, that could be a good rule of thumb. Am I using this to further my own, I hate the phrase, journey? Or am I pushing it outward? Beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And Erica, what are your thoughts on the ongoing debate around appropriation?
First off, furious agreement with everybody at the moment. I guess it did make me think of, because in the last year I've gone from being, I guess for want of a better word, an amateur tarot reader to a professional. And what you said, Lil, about who gets to a point, or when do you cross that threshold into making money off something? Where does your integrity sit? And it did make me think of why I crossed that threshold of the last year. And it was because I run a business called Art Oracle, where artists come to me by the hour and have a safe space to talk about their practice without worrying about there being an agenda or them jeopardizing their careers for saying the wrong thing or looking dumb. And when I ran out of tricks during the lockdown last year, I actually started saying some of them, I don't have any producer magic for you, but I have a tarot deck. Will that make you feel better? And I started doing tarot readings for people, and then they started booking in specifically for tarot readings, not to talk about their project or their career trajectory. And it was the artists who went, you need to start Tarot Oracle. This is actually helpful. And it occurs to me that also there are moments when the community tells you that you are ready to take on that mantle, as long as you have the integrity, or they tell you, yes, you've got the integrity and you're at the right point. I've done 20 years of reading cards for free for people to give them comfort or help or amuse them at parties or stave off someone's jet lag at one point as well too. And it was really nice getting that moment of going, maybe I should cross that threshold and try to hold this mantle with integrity. And part of that is also just thinking about different models, because we still have to survive as human beings. That's why capitalism is so coercive, because it marries our survival so intimately to a group of people who oppress us and doesn't give us any agency to look after ourselves, which is that disconnection from culture and land. When you're connected to culture and land, you don't need somebody else's permission to eat that night. It's something I'm still navigating as well too. Astrology has a model for that though. House 6 is about being useful to your community and the health and well-being that comes back to you when you're useful and you're valued through the work that you do with your community as well too. And House 2 talks about how you just shelter yourself from the elements, give yourself comfort and give yourself everything you need to sustain yourself on this earth as well too. So I think about those two kind of principles of astrology as well when we start heading over into the filthy lucre part of the conversation.
I love that you mention the reality, which is that people should not be ashamed to earn a living. I think that there is something about the shame that is heaped on sometimes to people who work in mystical practice and mystical spaces that is, to me, deeply connected with the way that we shame all caring professions and devalue caring professions. I think I once saw a documentary that had the noted skeptic Richard Dawkins going around and berating lovely elderly ladies who practiced caring for people through mystical practices. And I thought there was something just deeply misogynistic about that, perhaps. And I wondered, when we're reflecting on the naysayers and the people who want to deride and sort of downplay the importance or the validity of mysticism, what do you ever face them? How do you reconcile with them? And where do you think maybe that hectic energy is coming from?
Say something about the whole money thing. I completely agree that I try to tackle this in my book as well. This idea that there's something shameful inherently about getting money for a spiritual practice. I don't agree with that. I think everybody has to make a living. Where I worry is when, let's say, a Westerner appropriates Native American traditions, sets up a sweat lodge, and someone dies, and they're making thousands of dollars for something they have no right to run, that they don't know how to run, and basically they're literally responsible for the death of somebody. So I think we can differentiate between that and somebody charging for a tarot reading. I don't think there should be any shame around that. And I similarly see people attacking, Reiki healing, and we've got to stop infantilizing people who use services just because you don't agree with them. You don't have to think Reiki is real, but if somebody does and they genuinely walk out of that session feeling like that helped them, let's not assume that they are just being fleeced by somebody, because I know so many people in this industry and they are amazing people. And it breaks my heart to see such blanket condemnation of people because of belief. Now, the funny thing about the atheist lot, let's say, the Dawkins, and Dawkins isn't a skeptic, he's an atheist. So he's a very rational and he is very combative. He is condescending and racist. He's actually not just, saying, I don't agree with this. He is living by his disbelief. And that is very different to somebody who, say, is a skeptic who says, look, I just need proof. Now, I don't need proof. I'm not somebody who goes through life needing proof. I need proof of my experience. That's all I need. I will always be asking questions, and I'm okay with that. But this is the differentiation. And one thing you can say is doing things for free does not serve anybody, because in some cases, obviously that's needed. But when I've read for people, if there's no exchange, there's no benefit for that person. They walk away and they just want another one the next week. And I learned that the hard way, and I'm sure you know this, that it's just, you have to put a value on it so that the person feels like they have received something in return. Now, I'm not saying charge $300. That's not what I'm talking about. Some sort of exchange, though, is very necessary, because anyone who reads tarot can tell you it's energetic. It's very draining, and it can be very, very, be very beautiful, but you are definitely going somewhere dark sometimes or deep when you read for people. So I think exchange is a beautiful thing.
Gosh, I love that. And I love that you just did not mince your words. Just really.
Sorry, I had to say it.
I love it. No, I couldn't agree more. It feels very... it definitely feels quite racist the way, and quite vitriolic and vicious the way that these people will attack. And I also think that you need to have an understanding of power when you look at the role that atheism plays in our society right now, and its connection with what is acknowledged as scientific practice, and who had the power to get their things endorsed through that methodology, and who didn't, and why therefore that is not a yardstick for the validity of everything in the world. But thank you for calling it like it is, Amal. Love that. So these salty skeptics, these ashy men, as they tend to be, when you come up against them, do you try and just protect your energy and not engage? Sometimes that's my approach. Sometimes I sense that actually what they want is to distract me from this very fruitful path that I'm on. And I kind of do a deep inhale, and I'm preparing to give them a piece of my mind. And then I go... Auntie Toni Morrison taught me about this, about the fact that you're just trying to distract me, and I'm just going to give you dust, give you nothing. That's sometimes, I find, my most self-protective approach. How do you guys approach naysayers?
I just don't like to deal with people who are determined to misunderstand you. And that's often what those conversations are. And I can't explain the unexplainable. I can't explain the unknowable. And I've reconciled myself to that fact. I'm not going to reach down to the pits of my being to try and find the language to explain to someone who really couldn't care why I do what I do or why I believe what I believe. It's just not worth it. I often think that part of what makes that conversation really just not nourishing in any way is that we're not even reading the same book. We don't even have the same vocabulary to express this this experience that's so contrasting. Like, our experiences are not overlapping, and so I can't even pull from, you know, a common ground to explain to you why this is going to be beneficial. It's just not worth it. And I often think the metric somebody uses to determine whether or not anything spiritually sounded is good or bad are not the metrics somebody who actually uses the practice uses. So somebody might say, well, if tarot is completely intuitive, then how can you rely on it? Don't worry about it. Don't worry. Like, I've got it. Don't worry about it. It is okay, because there is not real concern here. You don't actually care. And I don't need to answer to somebody who is masking their ignorance as curiosity. It's not hot, and I see right through it.
So spot on. Can I just say, I have no interest in talking to naysayers, because I don't think we're speaking the same language. I think they're seeking validation for their own doubts, because if you're going to live your whole life trying to disprove something, you're as strong as the ardent believer who spends their whole life trying to prove something. And I'm neither of those people. You know, I always look at what I do as an invitation. If somebody sees me and says, hey, you know what, there's something about you that I like and I'd like to be more like you, what do? I'll tell them. But I have no interest in creating some sort of brand that speaks to people and convinces them, because I don't think people really want to be convinced. They want to shame you. They want to make you feel small, and they want to feel that they're right. Now, I've encountered people like this my whole life, so it's nothing new to me, and I know the playbook, so I don't really care. And I just think the less you care about those things, you find you don't really attract them anyway. Like, they don't really, and I don't say that in a woo way. You're not, like Bill said, like, you're not operating in the same space. You're just so different. And you know, even within the spaces of mysticism and curiosity and seeking, you're not necessarily in a group. Like, it's so different. Like, you know, you talked about tarot readers online. Like, I will admit, I get lost in the YouTube pick a card readings, because some of the readers are really good, but the stuff they say, of course, some of it's ridiculous, like telling people about twin flames and I don't know, like stuff that's just not useful to them. It's not going to help them in their lives. And I can't stop that. So I don't look at them and see my kin, you know, but I see people and I go, you're a really good reader. I really think I'll watch you again because I want to see how you interpreted that. So we've got logic still. We've got our minds. We're not blindly following things and trying to get everybody to do the same.
I love that.
It's
All about agency.
When it comes to naysay, yeah, definitely. I personally think that some people who are bent on not understanding and not seeing aren't actually supposed to. That there's no point for them to like be interacting with things. It's like I don't know what the inside of my computer looks like because I have nothing to fucking do with that. I'm going to break it. I will break it if I am playing around with the inside of the computer. That's just not my place. And so I understand that people who just aren't able to understand, it's not their spot. And people who are aggressively naysaying, like, it isn't even about them not believing. They're just like people who feel entitled to give someone or control somebody's perspective and outlook and how they're thinking about the world and what they're doing. So I could have been like playing badminton and that person would be, well, maybe not badminton, something else, but it's less about the practice. Well, no one can argue with, I like badminton a lot. I'm bad at it, but I love it. The point is that a lot of the time there are people who are just looking to exert their power on somebody else when they're going way out of their way to shut a person up or smush an idea.
I hear you. So true. Now I could talk to you all night. This is fascinating, but we have just 5 minutes left. So I should thank everybody. You have been fascinating and super engaging. And what I'm going to do we have a special treat because Lay is going to perform some beautiful poetry to close us out. So before I pass the mic to Lay, I'm going to say a huge thank you to the panel. It has been so wonderful hearing your insights on this, and your generosity has been beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm also going to let everybody at home know that we have a wonderful bookstore partner for tonight, and that is sorry, I'm off in my mystical land right now. I need to come back. So Neighborhood Books. And if you go onto their website, you can grab yourself a copy of Amal's book, In My Past Life I Was Cleopatra, or a copy of Lil's book, The Success Experiment. And I know I'm going to grab one of each. I will give them to my friends because I'm that sort of generous auntie. But all that remains is to say thank you so much to the sponsors, to the panel, to the Wheeler Centre, and to you for joining, and to pass the mic to Lay to end the evening with some beautiful poetry.
Through every reason, like all this takes, all it takes. All my days were all this takes. Like every love song had its season, like all this takes, all it takes. All my days were all this takes. Can you feel it? Like I feel them, 'cause I only catch myself half of the time. Can you hear them? Like I feel them, 'cause I only catch myself half of the time. Pipes. I think they're in the pipes. See, pipes creak the syllables of my name until I'm falling into spaces far and nothing in between, and everything's in between, and everything's in between. I mean, I don't know you yet, so we have everything in between. I sometimes imagine myself as a curtain being twisted into rope until all the days fall out and all the night falls short and all the life is done before. And then there's this something, and then the nothing, and everything's in between. And I think that I just don't know it yet, but everything's in between. Have you ever figured out how to meet your years? Because I met these moments while they were falling in and out of care for each other and everything in between. I sometimes hate how names that people call you, and I make these memories for how I like to fear. I've been crying falls into my own body and everything in between. I met you before, and everything in between, but you'd be standing too close if it weren't for everything in between. And then there's this something, and then the nothing, and then everything's in between. And I think that I just don't know it yet, but everything's in between. Once I made this city and my secret place for people I love who left. And then moments come to tell me things, and now everything else is in between. I roll my tongue through every reason, like all this takes, all it takes. Like all my days were all this takes. Like every love song's had its season, like all this takes, all it takes. All my days are all this takes. Can you feel it?
That was beautiful, Lay. Thank you so much. Everybody, good night.